Good evening and welcome to the ARK-aeology Files. I'm so glad that you could join us this evening as we dive into episode 7, where we will be talking about Abraham and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. But before we begin, let's open with a brief word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for being with us this evening and help us as we study your word and be with us throughout the rest of the week. In your name we pray, amen. So, when we left off last week, what we had the story of Abraham. And Abraham is a descendant of a man named Terah. Terah had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And from those, we get a lot of individuals that make up a majority of the book of Genesis. We learned that Abraham was from a city called in this upper area, and that Abraham moved down into the land of Israel, or also known as Canaan. But when he got there, he got in the middle of a famine. And so he had to go down into Egypt. While he was in Egypt, he met the Pharaoh. He got kicked out of Egypt because he lied to Pharaoh and ended up back in Israel. But while he was there, one of the things that I did want to highlight from our presentation last week with a little bit of clarification was a tomb painting found in the Beni Hassan tombs in Egypt. And this was from one of the governors of the pharaohs, Amenemhat II and Senusret II. So when we are looking at this cave painting, the cave painting identifies the individuals as being the Amu from Shu that were led by Abisha the Hyksos. Now, when we are looking at this, the Amu is another term for Armenian. The Shu comes from what is believed to be Shasu, which means wanderer. And we know that Terah's name means wanderer. So when we're looking at the name of the people, it's the people from Armenia who are wanderers or descendant of the wanderer. Going to the leader, Abisha the Hyksos, we know that Abisha means father of a gift, or my father is king, and Abram means father of a great gift, or my father is the Lord. So the names are pretty much identical. This would actually mean that this cave, or not cave painting, but tomb painting, actually identifies the individuals who came into Egypt at this early time frame, somewhere around the 1890s BC, are the descendants of Arphaxad, or the Armenians, through Terah, whose leader is Abraham, follower of the Lord. So that is quite interesting, and the red square there highlights this leader, Abisha the Hyksos. So now we are going to move into Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, when we are looking at Sodom and Gomorrah, we find this story in the book of Genesis. It's one of the cities of, or these are 2 of the cities of the plains. We find that there was a great battle after the Tower of Babel. The people have started settling all over the world, but it didn't take them long to start trying to conquer one another. So this is the battle of the 4 kings versus the 5 that we read about. It's one of the first major wars in the book of Genesis that we're seeing as far as the other nations that are surrounding Abraham's family. When we are looking at these cities, we are talking about this area, this region, southern and central ancient Israel, before it was actually Israel. The people came from up in this region, this north region up here. They came south. They made their settlements. They came from all over. We have people that were Armenians, Syrians, Hittites, the area where Assyria was, Elam, Babylon. So there's a lot of different nations. We know that the Tower of Babel was in this red circled area. So these are all of the different regions that are being settled at various times. And this map is overlaid on some of the current borders and boundaries so that you can place these on modern maps. When it comes to the cities of the plains, Jesus actually believed that they were real. He taught that they were real, and he used them as a warning, both for Capernaum, which was at this time a Jewish city, and to the people that simply were not accepting what he was saying. That was also used as an end times warning. So these weren't just ancient cities in the past that had no relevance to the time period. These were ancient cities that God used as not only a warning for the people of that day, but for us right here and now and in the future. What did these cities mean in Genesis? Well, we see them in Genesis 10. They form the boundaries of the border of Canaan. We have Sidon, Gerar, Gaza, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Lasha or Lasha. When we are looking at these on a map, it forms a slightly off-center rectangle that goes basically to the tip of the Dead Sea all the way up into Lebanon. We actually can still see the remains of Sidon in Lebanon, and we can see the remains in Gaza. So we still have some of these other cities, so it makes sense that we still would be able to see remains for these other cities, the cities that were destroyed yet preserved. Only God could utterly and completely destroy something and yet preserve it at the same time. The Bible also gives us a map for how we can locate these cities. If we go to Ezekiel 16 and 46, it actually tells us the direction that you would have to go to reach the city of Sodom, or what remained of Sodom. Now, in the ancient times, the way that they would monitor direction, it was actually, they didn't do things like north and south like we would do. We orient everything north to south. They were actually orienting everything east to west of the temple or the city of Jerusalem. So you would have to picture yourself standing in Jerusalem facing east, and anything that would be to your left hand is actually what would be north. Anything that was your right hand would be south. So if you see in the Bible where they're talking about left hand and right hand, and it's associated with direction, it's not talking east or west, it's actually talking north and south. So when it says that Samaria and her daughters are on the left hand, and that Sodom and her daughters are on the right hand, it means that if you were standing in Jerusalem, Samaria is to the north of you, and that Sodom is to the south. That is very interesting because that also means that some of the locations that a lot of archaeologists and historians are placing some of these remains for the city of Sodom and Gomorrah are actually inaccurate. One of those is Tel El Hammam. This one has gained a lot of attention because it has been advertised as the city of either Sodom or Gomorrah because they found this city, it was burnt, it made news last year because they believe that a piece of space debris had landed there at one point and burned it, and there was a lot of work that's been done there. But the problem is that if you were actually standing in Jerusalem looking directional wise using the book of Ezekiel, this city actually sits on the left hand of Jerusalem, making it an impossibility for either Sodom or Gomorrah. It simply is impossible for either one of those cities to be at Tel El Hammam, besides the fact that it's on the wrong side of the Jordan and the Dead Sea. It's wrong directional wise. You can also read about the East Sea and the Utmost Sea, the former sea and the Hinder Sea. The Hinder Sea is what is referred to in the Bible. You can read about that in Zechariah. It's the Mediterranean Sea, and the former sea is the Dead Sea. The East Sea is also referred to, and the Salt Sea, those are all the Dead Sea. And the Utmost Sea is another term for the Mediterranean Sea. Now, a lot of people believe that there's no archaeological evidence at all for the cities of the plains. The only place that, you can find information about these cities is in the Bible. That is until the Ebla tablets were discovered. These were a series of tablets. There was about 20,000 of them that were discovered in 1974. There was a group of people called the Ebalites. They were right between the Assyrian Empire, just south of them. They would have been in the region that would have been considered Syrians. And today, that actually rests in modern Syria. So when they are looking at these, there was a lot of information about the geography and the cities and directions and trade routes. And there's actually almost 300 cities that are named that you can go and you can find these cities. But they stirred up a lot of controversy because one of the researchers is looking through and he says, oh, we actually have some names here that are found nowhere else. And the names are Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zoar. And just to give you an idea of what this hoard of tablets look like, this is an example. So they weren't all nice and in a library for us. They were actually buried in the dirt. They had to be painstakingly dug up, and they were just in these piles, and there was over 20,000 of them. So there's no way that they have concluded all of their translations on these. It would take a lifetime to translate each and every one, but some of the larger ones and some of the smaller ones have been translated, and they're still working on these, and they've been working on these for quite some time. So it wouldn't be surprising to see new research come out on the Ebla tablets, because this is definitely an ongoing process. But as they were looking through these, one of the professors, Professor Friedman, he says, among the many personal names in both the Bible and the tablets are the following: Abram, David, Esau, Ishmael, Israel, and that the spelling in Eblite is so close in all cases that there can be no question of the identity of the names. So this is a researcher who specializes in Elam, and not Elam, Ebla, and he is saying that these names are so close, there's no way that you can interpret them any other way. And here is some information. This is one of the tablets. It got so crazy on the debates that the Syrian government actually had to shut down the debate. They will not allow the debate to go on because it was so controversial and was getting so out of hand and so violent. They actually had to step in and shut down the debate. But the debate was because it listed these cities: Sodom, Gomorrah, Zoar. It's something that you just can't ignore. And these particular towns, especially Sodom and Gomorrah, are listed as one of the towns that were regularly visited on the King's Highway that ran from Damascus. And we know that Abraham at one point had either stopped by Damascus on his way to the Canaanite area, or we do know that his servant was from Damascus. So they were very familiar with that. The King's Highway may have been a trade route that Abraham himself was traveling on. But when we are looking at these tablets, Sodom and Gomorrah were definitely on these trade routes, and so it would make sense that they were two of the cities named as making up part of the border of the land of Canaan. When we are looking at Luke 17:29-30, we know that when Lot left Sodom, that the fire and brimstone came down that very day. It says that in Genesis. And it also gives the warning that, hey, guess what? This is something that is going to happen again. So, this study into finding out what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah is very relevant because we don't want to find ourselves in Sodom, spiritual Sodom, when the Lord returns. That wouldn't be a very fun thing. And we're going to see why. One of the locations we can look at, this is one of the remains of a building that was from one of the cities of the plains, and it has completely and utterly turned to ash. This is what I was referencing when I said only God could utterly destroy something and yet it still remain. This is how. If you actually go onto a Google satellite imagery or Google Maps, you can still pinpoint some of the locations by how white the soil is from the ash that was there. The area is known for salt deposits and for mineral deposits. So you will see some whitish areas on the maps, but there's a ultra high concentration of this ash and sulfur that is in the locations for the cities of the plains. And it is theorized that the Dead Sea actually did not exist at the point of Sodom and Gomorrah, that these were valleys that the Jordan River ran through the Dead Sea area, and that after the destruction of the cities, the sulfur and brimstone and destruction of the cities actually changed the geographic terrain of the area and caused massive erosion, which led to massive amounts of salt being poured into the valley. And thus, this is why we have the Dead Sea today. And we do know that one of the byproducts of sulfur and brimstone is a high salt content. So that may be one of the reasons why the Dead Sea exists. But that would require some additional surveys and studying into the sea. But just thought I'd point that out. First, we're going to look at the remains of the city of Sodom. So here is a satellite image. I've highlighted the potential area for where the city is. It was more circular. It wasn't completely a perfect circle. They made use of the natural landforms to protect the city. We see this in other locations around the globe where they would use the geologic formations that were already in existence to build. We can see this in some of the locations in cities that are, say, near the Grand Canyon and the cliff dwellers, in places out in Arizona. So this is some of the region, and this is not a new find. A lot of people say, well, nobody knew about this stuff until the 1980s and the 1990s, and it's all a hoax. But that's actually not true. It was rediscovered in the 80s and 90s, but it had actually already been highlighted all the way back during the early days of World War I, back sometime between 1938 and 1941. And that is actually when we had several individuals go into the area and take photographs that are now in photo archive collections. And we can see where they were something struck them about this location. They actually called it Sodom. Now, there is a mountain in that vicinity called Mount Sodom, has been called that for years. And at this particular location, you can see what appears to be columns and arches of a potentially very large building, very large structure here. Here is what it looks like today. There has been a lot of weathering and decay. But if you think that this looks familiar, you're like, I think I've seen something along of a similar style. Here's an idea of what it may have resembled. This is one of the formations that you see in Petra. Now, Petra's formations buildings come from around the 1st century AD, but it is a similar style that we see in other ancient architecture all over the Middle and Far East and Near East for going back generations. So it's not unusual to have something along this style from back at the time of Abraham. That would not be something that would be surprising. So if you think that oh, that looks familiar, it's probably because it resembled originally something along these lines before it was destroyed. We also see in the ash formations what resembles pyramids. So here I have a picture of the bent pyramid and an ash formation. So the bent pyramid in Egypt, you can see, and I apologize, my mouse is smaller today than it was last night. I will remember to adjust that next week. But when we are looking at the bent pyramid started at a broader angle, and then once they got about halfway, the angle changed steeply. And what we see with some of the pyramid type formations at the cities of the plain is we see a similar design, only maybe not quite so steep and more of potential ziggurats on top of the formations, which is also something that we would see when we're looking at ancient cities, say the southern down in the territory of Babylonia. We also see in these formations double walls. So you can see here where we have one wall, and then on top of that, set a little further in, is a second wall rising behind it. This is a common structure that you see in ancient architecture. And then you can see buildings behind that, but that would have been something that was very, very common. And you can imagine that, as somebody is trying to, if they were trying to attack the city, they would have to scale the wall. They would get to the top, and then lo and behold, there is another wall that they have to scale. There has been some studies done that suggest that the entire area had a very high gold content. You cannot find gold there now, but some of the original tests that were done did show that there had been gold at a previous time, but that gold has now, it's all the mixed in the dust and the ash, just like everything else that is there. But it's possible that these walls would have been covered in limestone with gold decoration, maybe painted or done some trim work to make them more beautiful and lovely. We also have ash formations. We can see the layers right here. You can see how the layers upon layers upon layers of ash in certain locations we'll see later on, where you can actually see where the layers actually swirl up because there was such intense heat. At some of the locations, you can also see what appears to be sphinx. Now, the Sphinx do resemble what we can see from the Great Sphinx in Egypt. Whether or not they resembled that face structure exactly, that's left to be determined. But we do see structures that do greatly resemble the sphinxes that we see in other cultures, because sphinxes were not exclusive to Egypt. It's just that they are best known and best preserved there. Now, again, back to our ziggurat, I did want to point out that we can see where there were wooden beams that have been burned. Here again, you can see wooden beams, and we know that that is a way that the pyramids themselves were built, is by inserting wooden beams to help stabilize the structure and serve as part of the foundation when they were building it. Moving into the city of Gomorrah, this you can get the best view of the city of Gomorrah, and that is because of the city of Masada. So Masada was a fortress at the time of Herod, so think 70s AD. This is when Masada was built. There was that battle and the whole story of Masada, and everybody goes there to see the fort. But if you are on top of the fort, you can actually look down and you can see the city of Gomorrah. The ruins are right there. And actually, here is a video showing from ground level. Somebody took a drone in, and you can actually see as you rise above some of these domes, you can actually see some of the outline of the city. And this right here, you can see where there was a river. It might still on occasion flow. I am uncertain about whether or not you can, if it fills up at certain times of the years or has a small river flowing through there, because some rivers do have that potential in this region. But you can see the white ash all through this entire area, and there would have been a river running through it, and they would have made use of the natural landforms to build their houses, to have their temples and their palaces. As you're looking at this video, you can see where some of the walls were. So they would have had walls and various roadways where they would have had their different paths. They could have set up shops along there, could have served as protection. If you want to know exactly how big these buildings are, here is another video that is showing just what it looks like if you were actually to walk through these cities, which you can still do today. This structure here reminds me of structures that we see in the Grand Canyon, where the natives have built some of their outlook posts. And we can see that in some of the other cities where later on they have built outlook posts. We can see this in Zeboim, which I will show you later. But you can actually go to all of these locations and you can still see these structures. You can see the walls on top of the walls where the ancient buildings were. Here is another example of what may or may not be either a pedestal or the imprint of this one almost looks like a giant foot from a tremendous colossal statue. Some of these do resemble smaller pedestals for village idols or town idols or for a variety of different purposes. But we do know that these are structures that were all destroyed because the people were so evil, they only could continually think of evil things to do. And so God was left with no choice but to destroy them. This is one of the structures that I wanted to point out where you can see the swirling just on how hot this structure got, that it almost turned completely into liquid form before it settled. And you can see this structure right here. This is a close-up of it, and this is a further away zoom, where there was some type of either a palace, governmental building, or a temple on top of this fortified wall. Here's another example of individuals that are walking through the city. You can see an individual, either fortress or palace. Here again, you can see where the roadway or the waterway would have run, so they could have gotten water from within the city. This is something that we also would see in Babylon, where they went through and they had the Euphrates River running through the city with gates so that they could still get the benefits of the water, but they would not have that as something where an enemy could just make use of that and float on in the middle of the city. So there would have been walls and gates built around that river. And the only reason that Babylon fell is because somebody didn't lock the gates. They were too busy having a party. So we do see this much later on. We have examples, and we see something very similar at the city here in Gomorrah. How tall are the walls? Well, I don't know exactly because there haven't been many studies that have been conducted on exactly how tall the structures are, but I can give you an idea, and here is how. So when we are looking at this picture, we're trying to get an idea of just exactly how tall these walls are. So we are going to use this bus. Now, buses vary in height. So in Israel, the buses average somewhere between 3 and 3.6 meters, or 9.84 to 11.8 feet, with an average of about 10.8 feet. So we are going to go with the average, and we are going to stack the buses on top of one another until we get to the top level of the wall, which is represented by that yellow arrow. So we are going to stack the buses, and as we are stacking the buses, we are going to average them out at 10.8 feet, which means that it's approximately 54 feet tall. So just under 60 feet, because we do have some space here that I did not account for. But the walls themselves would appear to be 60 feet. Now, these walls are covered in ash. We do not know how deep those ash layers go. So if you were actually to dig down to the foundation of the walls, to the original level where they would have begun building, those walls could be much taller. But 60 feet would appear to be the current base level for the walls. If we are looking at the ash monument layers versus the modern layers, we can actually see where there's actually windows. You see these windows here in the upper right corner of your screen? And the style of these buildings, the way that they're built into the wall, actually closely resembles what we see in modern structures and in ancient structures from the land of Canaan. So this is not something that they would have been unaware of. If you continue through the city, you can see lots of various structures. This is an artist rendition of potential looks for the city and what may have stood there. Here are additional photos where you can see, this one may have been a sphinx. It may have been a giant foot. This one may have been a pyramid, ziggurat type structure. This one here resembles somewhat what we're familiar with how the walls were constructed. They could have been made of brick. They could have been plastered over. We're not quite certain because there haven't been complete studies, but what we can see is we can see the base foundation layers and know that, yes, there were windows here. Some of the best examples, though, that we're going to see are actually from Admah. So Admah is the city. It is further north. It is at the north end of the Dead Sea. When we are looking at it, here's one example, and you can actually see if you look down at the lower right corner, that is the upper corner of the Dead Sea. So Admah is not far away from the Dead Sea. Here is a more recent satellite imagery view from Google Maps. And you can see where there is a river that runs through Admah, at least two of them. There may have been more. I'm uncertain of when exactly these rivers, how ancient they are, if these are more modern irrigation rivers. Sometimes in satellite photos, you can actually see more ancient features. Sometimes you cannot, and you would need LiDAR scans to actually be able to see beneath the more modern layers and see the more ancient ones. But I do not know of any LiDAR scans that have been done on this particular area. But as you are traveling to the city of Admah, What you can see is in the distance, you can see flat, 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 flat land, and then all of a sudden you see a city rise from the plain. Here is another view of the city that is sitting on the plain. And when you go into the gates, because yes, you can still see the gates, there is a large flat opening. This is most likely where the people of the ancient times would have come. There would have been markets. This would have been a place for their caravans, where all of the city business could have been conducted rather than going deeper into the city. This would have been the place where they could have double checked to make sure that you didn't have any nefarious purposes. But what I love about the city of Admah is the fact that it has the best preserved arches and windows and doors and rooms. And special thanks to Jake Wilson, who has given permission to share these images. He went through and he took fabulous photos of this city. You can see where there were arches and doorways and the windows. You can see where there are niches in the wall where they were storing items. He could have gone further in here, but you don't want to walk too far into these structures. There have been a lot of people that have gone and visited these locations, and the story that I've gotten from a lot of them is these structures, yes, they still exist, but you want to be extra cautious when going into any of these rooms because they could collapse. They are just ash. So you've got to be very careful when exploring these. Another really great photo is this archway with these niches where we see very similar type structures in South America and in Egypt and in India, where even in Greece and Rome, where they would have placed their household gods into these little niches in the walls. And that's where they would have done their idolatry worship. This one, you can see somebody burnt their bread. It's overdone. They were still cooking, and you can see the flatbread still in the oven from when they were cooking. That is how detailed some of the remains are that you can still see, and yet nothing is there. It's just literally ash. For the final city that we're going to discuss, this is Zeboim. Zeboim, if you look, here's the city of Jericho. Jericho is right here. Zeboim is right here. It is so close to Jericho. Here is a more current Google image of the city. You can see it's not as large as the other ones. So while the other ones were about anywhere between 1 to 3 miles across, Zeboim is only about a mile long and maybe half a mile wide. It was probably one of the newer cities that had been built. If we're looking at Gomorrah, Gomorrah was the largest one. It was about 3 miles long and about a mile and a half wide. It was more of the oval shape. When we're looking at the city of Sodom, it was about a mile and a half circle. But Zeboim, it's pretty small. Zoar is about the same size, maybe a little smaller. Zoar was basically an overflow for Sodom because the city had expanded so much. But Zeboim is the most northern. It is also the one that has suffered the most effects of weathering and erosion. There's really not much of it left at all. It's also extremely dangerous to go there and explore right now because of the political situation. So it's gotten the least amount of attention. You can see this was potentially one of the idolatrous altars, but it's really hard to make out anything in this city. You can see some of the walls. At one point, there was an ancient watchtower. So you can see where they built on the remains, they built this brick watchtower to be able to look for people that were coming from the north and they put it in these remains of the city. But other than that, there's not a lot of remains left from Zeboim. Now, one of the interesting things, how do we know that these are the cities? Well, it's because of something called fire and brimstone. So you can go to any one of these cities and you can find thousands of these little balls of sulfur. In some cases, they are actually encased inside of this thick protective coating, and you can see that here. It is a hard shell, if you will, in which if you bust that shell open, there is a chalky white sulfur ball, and they stink. Oh, do they stink so bad. If you touch one, you will smell it on your hands for days if it is fresh and it hasn't been exposed to the air for very long. Once it's been exposed to the air, it doesn't smell as bad, but it is a putrid smell. And I think that the smell probably would have killed the people before the actual fire got to them in this case, and that would have been a small blessing in disguise. But they do not smell good at all. When you're looking at them though, it's rain patterns. There's no rhyme or reason. It's like the cities were rained upon, which we are told that the cities were rained upon. Another interesting feature is that these sulfur balls, they have a different composition. Natural sulfur tends to be more yellowish in color, geothermal regions. You do find some of the white, but there is still a yellowish tint to it. If you go to, say, Yellowstone, you can see some of the more white sulfur, but it's not in the sulfur balls. This is something that is pretty unique to these particular cities. When we are looking, here's a close-up of the marks, the burn marks, where the sulfur ball landed and embedded itself into these pieces of what I'm thinking were plaster that was attached to the buildings and covered the buildings. We know that they used this method when they were building the pyramids. So they would use the stone bricks and then plaster them with limestone. So I'm thinking that it was probably something very similar that they used for the construction of these cities. But again, here's a close-up of these little sulfur balls. And when I say little, they're not always tiny. Some of them are very, very small, and some of them are the size of your fist or larger. So they can be very, very large. Now, these were discovered in the 1980s, the 1990s. Sometimes you can find them. Sometimes you actually have to dig. So it depends on, if it's rained in the area recently, if there's been any, earthquake activity that would shift so that you could see them on the surface, or if you actually have to remove some of the surface layer, and then just below that surface layer, you can actually start to see all of these sulfur balls everywhere. What is unique about these sulfur balls when they test them? They are 95.5% pure sulfur. This is the only place in the world where you can find sulfur that is this pure. Now, when God is talking in the book of Amos, Amos 4:11, we see where it says that God has overthrown some of you as he did Sodom and Gomorrah. So we know that Sodom and Gomorrah weren't necessarily the only places. The cities of the plains were not the only places that were destroyed in a very similar manner to this. We do not currently know of any cities that we can actually find sulfur balls for. There have been some smaller areas where it would appear that the animal herds that were surrounding the cities were actually destroyed at the same time. So all remnants and traces of the cities of the plain ended up being destroyed. But we do not have any confirmed sulfur balls found anywhere else. However, there is a place in Pakistan, there is a national park on the coast of Pakistan that actually does have some very similar features to what we see in the cities of the plains. And they believe that it's possible that there is a sphinx there. There are steps, there's pillars. It is symmetrical. There are 90-degree angles. 90-degree angles tend to not be found in nature naturally. They have to be manipulated by man. So it is a possibility that this is actually an example of a city that was similarly destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah, but nobody has actually done any research there to confirm to see if they could find these sulfur balls at the city. There are other places around the world that do potentially resemble these other structures, but again, unless you actually find the sulfur balls, there's no way to confirm that they were destroyed in the same manner. Another question that comes from the cities of the plains is, does the pillar of Lot's wife still exist? This was a question I believe that we got on our Q&A session a couple of episodes back, so just wanted to touch on this one real quick. So if we are looking at the pillar or for the pillar of Lot's wife, we would be looking somewhere near Sodom because that is where Lot lived. Lot lived somewhere near Sodom. And we know that Mount Sodom is right in this location. We know that Lot fled this location. There are two pillars that have been promoted. They are one right below Sodom on the Israeli side of the Dead Sea. The other one is on the Jordanian side of the Dead Sea. Both lay claim to being the pillar of Lot's wife. Here is what they look like. Personally, I do not feel that either one of them are the actual pillar of Lot's wife. We do have traditional records that say you could still see her pillar up until the days of at least Christ. So it is possible that the pillar of salt that was Lot's wife existed for a time, but I do not believe that either one of these locations are actually the pillar. One, they're way, way, way too tall for what we know the height of the people in that day. I think one of these pillars lays claim to be something like 32 feet tall, and that doesn't match anything that we know from any of the records. But these are potential sites for Lot's wife, but we have no confirmed location, and I do not believe that either one of these is the actual site. However, the site in Israel is set over top of a series of caves that are known as the Caves of Lot. So there is some potential that the reason that this particular structure got its name is because of its association with this being the region in which Lot eventually settled for a brief time before he moved into what is now Jordan, and his descendants took over that area and became Moab and Ammon. And I think that concludes today's program if we have no questions. If you have any questions about today's program, now is the time to go ahead and put those into the chat. If you have any questions throughout the week, you know that you can use any of our social media, or we do have a question form on our website at diggingyourbible.com. So if you have questions, you can turn those in there or make comments on our social media and we can find them and answer them. If we have no questions, we can conclude. I just want to make sure that you are aware of our program next week. We will be picking up with Isaac and Jacob, and we will be talking about Jacob's life, where Jacob lived, and his sons. And we're going to start getting into the second most requested topic, which is the Israelites in Egypt. So stick with us this month because the ARK-aeology Files will be diving into the history of the Israelites in Egypt. We've got some really exciting information coming up about that, and we also have our Friday night Q&As. So stick with us for the month of April as we discuss those. We have no questions that have come up in our questionnaire box, so we're going to go ahead and close with a brief word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for being with us. Please be with us throughout the rest of the week. Guide us and protect us. Please let your angels be with us and just put your protecting hand over the world. We know that the end is coming soon, and we know that there are going to be some very terrifying events that are going to be occurring. But with your protection, we know that we are safe in your hands. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you, and hope to see you this coming Friday and next Saturday.